The train whistled a long, lonely note as it slowed into the little Wyoming station, a cloud of steam curling upward, like a sigh, into the clear blue sky. Clara Mayfield sat stiffly in her seat, gloved hands clutching a folded letter. So often handled its creases had begun to split. The handwriting on the paper was strong and deliberate, the words simple. I seek a wife willing to share a modest life on my ranch. If you are of good character, I will meet you at the depot on the first day of June. Tom Evans. She had read it 100 times in the weeks since it arrived, committing to memory not just the words, but the way they made her feel, like a door might be opening after years of walking a narrowing path. She had no illusions of romance as in the dime novels her younger sister used to devour. She wanted security, a roof that didn't leak in spring rains, and enough food to last the winter. Still, she'd allowed herself to picture the man who penned it tall perhaps, with a kind smile, hands roughened by honest work. The brakes screeched, and the train shuddered to a stop. Outside, the platform was sun-bleached and dust-worn, the boards warped from years of wind and weather. Clara stepped down, her skirts brushing against the valise she carried, all her worldly belongings contained within its scuffed leather walls. The townsfolk noticed her right away. A few men leaned against a hitching post, their conversation pausing just long enough to sweep her with appraising eyes. A pair of women in wide-brimmed hats whispered behind gloved hands. Clara felt the heat rise in her cheeks. She was used to being looked at, though not often with admiration. Her features were plain, her figure sturdy, her hair the color of wheat just before harvest. She kept her chin up all the same. Then she saw him. The man walking toward her was not the image she had conjured in her mind. He was tall, yes, but the gray at his temples spoke of a life already well lived. His shirt was rolled at the sleeves, showing sinewy forearms darkened by sun, and his trousers bore the dust of the trail. He moved with a steadiness that drew the eye, not hurried, yet with a purpose that spoke of a man who knew where he was going. Miss Mayfield. His voice was warm but measured, like a stove kept just hot enough to work. Yes, she said, adjusting her grip on her valise. I'm Tom Evans. He took off his hat, revealing hair black as coal streaked with silver. Long trip. 3 days, she replied, long enough to be glad to see solid ground. He smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. I've got a wagon just over here. They walked in silence for a few steps, the sound of her skirt's hem brushing the dirt road mixing with the creak of wagon wheels nearby. Clara glanced at him from the corner of her eye. He was polite, but there was a reserve to him, as though he measured each word before letting it loose. As they passed the general store, a man tipped his hat to Tom, with a deference Clara found odd for a supposed modest rancher. Others watched, not with idle curiosity, but with something sharper, more assessing. She tucked the observation away for later. The wagon was sturdy and well-kept, its boards freshly oiled, the leather reins polished. Clara climbed up, perching on the bench as Tom settled beside her. The road out of town unspooled like a ribbon through golden fields. Clara let the sight ease some of her unease. The air smelled of wild sage and distant rain. Your ranch, she ventured. Is it far? Couple hours' ride, he said. Plenty of space. Good grazing land. He didn't elaborate, and she didn't press. She knew better than to demand conversation from a man and used to giving it. Still, she noticed things. The way he handled the reins, with practiced ease. The faint scent of expensive tobacco lingering on his coat, finer than any she'd smelled in her father's parlor. The boots he wore bore the marks of use, but the leather was of high quality. They crested a rise, and Clara's breath caught. Spread out before them was not the modest homestead she had envisioned, but a sprawling ranch, its main house 2 stories tall with white-painted trim and a wraparound porch. Barns and corrals dotted the land, and cattle grazed in the distance like dark flecks on a golden quilt. She turned to him, startled. This is yours. His eyes, fixed on the road ahead, gave nothing away. We'll be there soon. The closer they drew, the more Clara's unease grew. She had dressed and prepared for a life of hard work in a humble cabin, not for stepping into a home that could have belonged to one of the county's wealthiest families. As the wagon rolled into the yard, a stern-faced woman emerged from the porch, her black dress crisp despite the dust in the air. "Mrs. Whitcomb," Tom said by way of introduction. "Housekeeper." The woman gave Clara a once-over, her expression unreadable. "We've prepared the blue room," she said to Tom, then turned to Clara with a thin smile. "I'll see to your things." Tom helped Clara down from the wagon, his hand warm around hers. "You must be tired," he said quietly. "We'll talk after you've rested." She nodded, though her mind whirled. Why had he written of a modest life if this estate, was the truth? And why did the townsfolk treat him as someone far more important than he claimed? As Mrs. Whitcomb led her inside, the scent of polished wood and fresh bread greeted her. The blue room was finer than any bedroom she'd ever seen, its windows draped in lace, its quilts stitched in intricate patterns. Clara set her valise down at the foot of the bed, staring at her reflection in the polished mirror. The woman who stared back seemed out of place, a prairie girl dropped into a world that wasn't meant for her. From the window, she could see Tom speaking to one of the ranch hands, the two men's faces serious. She couldn't hear the words, but the ranch hand's nod was deferential. Her pulse quickened. Something about all of this didn't fit the letter she'd received or the life she'd expected. She didn't yet know what to make of it, only that the man she'd come to marry was not the man he had claimed to be. And whatever truth lay behind his guarded eyes, she would have to discover it before it was too late. Clara woke before dawn, the blue room still steeped in shadow. The steady tick of the mantel clock was the only sound, yet her thoughts clattered noisily in her mind. She dressed quietly, pulling her hair into a neat braid, and stepped into the hallway where the scent of coffee drifted from the kitchen. Downstairs, Mrs. Whitcomb moved with military precision, her every gesture sharp and economical. The woman acknowledged Clara with a curt nod. "Mr. Evans is out in the south pasture," she said, not pausing her work. "Breakfast will be ready when he returns." Clara hesitated. "I could help." Mrs. Whitcomb's knife struck the cutting board with a decisive thunk. "We have our ways here. You'll learn them in time." It wasn't quite unkind, but it was a warning. There were rules in this house, and Clara was not yet a part of them. She stepped outside, drawn by the pale light spreading across the horizon. The air was crisp, laced with the smell of damp earth and horses. From a distance, she saw Tom on horseback, riding the fence line, with a ranch hand. His posture was relaxed but alert, as though he saw more than he let on. When he dismounted near the barn, she walked toward him. "You're up early," he said, looping the reins over a post. "I wanted to see the ranch." A faint smile tugged at his mouth. "It's yours now, too." She studied him, searching for any sign that he might explain why he had written of a modest life when he clearly owned more land than most could dream of. But his expression remained unreadable. "I wasn't expecting," she gestured toward the sprawling property. "All this." His eyes narrowed slightly, though not in anger. A man's circumstances can change. In just a few months. That earned her a longer look, one that seemed to measure her resolve. "It's not a story for the breakfast table." They walked back toward the house in silence, but Clara's curiosity burned hotter with each step. Later that morning, Tom rode into town for supplies. Clara, left to herself, wandered the property. She found the stables immaculate, the tack gleaming, the horses well-fed and groomed. This was no struggling operation. Every sign pointed to wealth carefully managed. In the main barn, she encountered an older ranch hand named Will. His weathered face split into a grin when he saw her. "You must be Mrs. Evans," he said, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Didn't think I'd live to see the day Tom brought a lady home." "Has he lived here long?" she asked casually. "Born and raised," Will said. "Though for a spell he was away, California, I think. Came back near 10 years ago after his father passed. Took over the ranch and, well, you see what he's made of it." "His father owned all this?" Will's grin faltered. "You mean he didn't tell you?" Clara shook her head. The man glanced toward the house, lowered his voice. "Old man Evans didn't just run cattle. He owned half the grazing rights this side of the county, and Tom's doubled it since. There's not a man in 3 towns richer than he is." The words sent a ripple of unease through her. Tom had written to her as though he were a simple rancher looking for a partner in hard work and modest living. Why disguise himself? Why lure a stranger from hundreds of miles away under false pretenses? That evening, after supper, she found him on the porch, staring toward the distant hills where the sky blushed with the last light of day. "Tom," she began carefully, "I spoke to Will today." His gaze didn't waver from the horizon. "Did you now? He said your family has owned this land for generations, that you're one of the richest men in the county." He was silent for a moment, the only sound the low hum of crickets. Then he exhaled, slow and steady. "It's true." "Then why tell me otherwise?" His eyes finally met hers. "Because I wanted someone who'd marry me for the man I am, not the land I own." Her heart thudded. "And you thought lying was the way to find that out?" "I thought truth could wait until I knew if you'd stay," he said quietly. "I've seen enough false smiles to last me a lifetime." Clara folded her arms, unsure whether to feel anger or pity. "You talk about false smiles as if they're worse than false words." For the first time since she'd met him, his composure cracked. A flash of regret shadowed his features. "Maybe they are," he murmured. Over the next few days, Clara began to see glimpses of the man beneath the guarded exterior. He worked alongside his ranch hands, never asking more of them than he did of himself. He treated his horses with a gentleness at odds with his gruff manner, and yet he kept a distance from her, as though unwilling to bridge the gulf created by his deception. The townsfolk, however, offered no such restraint. When she accompanied him into town one afternoon, women whispered openly about her. She heard words like mail order and plain looking float on the breeze. One bolder woman, Mrs. Hensley, stepped directly into their path. "Tom Evans," she said with a saccharine smile, "I didn't expect to see you so soon after your sudden marriage. I must say, your bride is different than we all imagined." Tom's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Evans is exactly the woman I imagined," he said, his voice low but firm. "And more." Clara said nothing, but the way he squared his shoulders in her defense sent an unfamiliar warmth through her. That night, Clara sat in the blue room, staring at the letter that had brought her here. The words were the same, yet they no longer felt like a promise. More like the opening move in a game she hadn't known she was playing. Downstairs, she heard Tom speaking with Mrs. Whitcomb, their voices muffled but tense. She caught fragments. Land dispute, water rights, trouble brewing. When Tom came up later, his expression was unreadable again. "You'll be safe here," he said simply, as though it were a promise he intended to keep at any cost. But Clara had learned enough to know safety in this place was not a given. Secrets clung to these walls as tightly as the scent of polished wood, and if she was to survive, and perhaps even find her place here, she needed to learn them all. For now, she would bide her time, watch and wait. But she would not be fooled again. The first frost of autumn silvered the fields, each blade of grass glittering in the pale morning light. Clara pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she crossed the yard, her breath clouding in the chill. She had spent the past 2 weeks learning the rhythm of the ranch, the measured cadence of hoofbeats in the distance, the clatter of harnesses, the voices of the men rising with the sun. Yet there was still a wall between her and the heart of it all. Tom was that wall. He treated her with courtesy, even kindness at times, but his reserve never cracked. Meals were filled with practical talk, weather, cattle, repairs, but never the sort of conversation that revealed the man beneath the steady gaze and weathered hands. Clara had promised herself she would not be passive in her own life. That morning, she decided the wall would have to come down. She found him in the south paddock, repairing a section of split rail. The air smelled of fresh-cut wood and cold earth. "Tom," she said, approaching. He straightened, pushing his hat back slightly. "You're up early. I wanted to talk." He wiped his hands on his trousers, his expression guarded. "Go ahead. You've kept me at arm's length since the day I arrived," she said, meeting his eyes. "I can't build a life here if I'm treated like a guest you're not sure you want." A muscle in his jaw tightened. "You think I don't want you here?" "I think you don't trust me," she replied. His gaze flicked toward the horizon, as if he could find the right words written in the line of the hills. Trust is earned. And how am I supposed to earn it if you won't let me close? For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he set down his hammer and stepped toward her. You came here because of a letter, Clara. Words on paper don't tell you what a man's done or what he's capable of. Then tell me, she said quietly. That evening, after the work was done and the lamps lit, Tom poured 2 cups of coffee and joined her on the porch. The night was cold, the sky scattered with stars sharp as cut glass. I wasn't dishonest about who I am, he began. But I didn't tell you everything. My father built this ranch, but he also made enemies. When I took over, I kept them close enough to watch. Some wanted my land. Some wanted to ruin me just to say they could. One of them succeeded for a time. Clara listened, her hands curled around the warm mug. They took the south pasture from me, he continued. Not with guns, with the law. Twisted contracts, false claims. It nearly broke me. I fought to get it back, and I did. But it cost more than I'll ever say. Her voice was gentle. Why tell me now? Because, he said, his eyes holding hers in the dim light. Someone's trying again. And if you're going to stand beside me, you need to know what that means. The next day, Clara saw the shape of that danger for herself. A man in a dark coat rode up the drive, his horse lathered and restless. He dismounted without greeting, his eyes cold as he handed Tom an envelope. You've got until winter to clear off the north grazing lands, the man said, or we'll clear them for you. Tom didn't flinch. Tell your employer the answer's the same as last time. The man's smile was thin and unpleasant. Last time, you didn't have a wife to think about. Clara felt the chill in those words like a blade pressed to the skin. The man rode off without another word, leaving only the echo of hooves on frozen earth. Tom crumpled the envelope without opening it. That night, Clara found him in the barn, sitting on a hay bale, his elbows resting on his knees. You should have told me sooner, she said. He shook his head. I didn't want to drag you into it. I'm already in it, she replied. You made me your wife. That means I face what you face. Something shifted in his eyes then, a flicker of recognition that perhaps she wasn't the fragile outsider he'd imagined. You're stronger than I thought, he murmured. I had to be, she said, her voice steady. Before I came here, I survived on my own, not by being timid. For the first time, his hand reached for hers, rough and warm. Then maybe we can face this together. Over the days that followed, the wall between them began to crack. Tom taught her to ride the boundary lines, showing her where the land dipped into hidden gullies and where the streams fed the cattle ponds. She learned the names of the ranch hands, the subtle signs of an approaching storm, the quiet pride in a herd well kept. But it wasn't all quiet lessons. Twice they found fence lines cut, once a water trough poisoned. Each act of sabotage was a reminder. Someone wanted this land, and they were willing to risk much to take it. One afternoon, as they repaired a section of wire together, Tom said, If they push harder, I'll send you to your sister in Denver. Clara set down the wire pliers sharply. No, I won't be packed off like a crate of china every time there's trouble. He stared at her, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at his mouth. You're stubborn. I'm committed, she corrected. The first true thaw in Tom's reserve came on a bitterly cold night. A blizzard had blown in fast, snow piling against the door. They worked side by side in the barn, bedding down the animals, lantern light casting their shadows long across the hay. When they were finished, Tom paused, brushing snow from her hair. You've done more for this place in a month than I had any right to expect. Her breath caught, though she kept her voice light. Was that a compliment? It was, he said, his eyes warm in a way she'd never seen before. The moment lingered, unspoken words hanging between them like frost in the air. Then he stepped back, the wall not gone, but lower than it had ever been. That night, as Clara lay awake listening to the wind, she realized something had changed. Tom was no longer simply the man she had married. He was becoming the man she might come to love, if the trouble on the horizon didn't tear them apart first. The danger was no longer abstract. It was riding toward them with every passing day, its shadow lengthening over the ranch. And when it arrived, she knew the wall between them would either crumble completely or rise higher than ever. The morning the final challenge arrived, the sky was an ominous slate gray, heavy with the promise of snow. Clara stood at the kitchen window, watching the frost grip the earth like a stubborn hand. The coffee pot steamed on the stove, but her appetite was nowhere to be found. Tom had been up before dawn, saddling his best mare. Today was the day the sheriff would hear both sides of the dispute over the grazing lands, the day their enemies planned to make their claim legal and permanent. She heard the crunch of boots on the porch before the door swung open. Tom stepped inside, dusted with snow, his expression carved from stone. "It's time," he said simply. The ride into town was silent. Clara's hands were clenched around the reins, her mind replaying every moment of the past weeks, the cut fences, the poisoned trough, the threat delivered like a venom-laced promise. She had been a mail-order bride, yes, but now she was something else entirely, a woman with a stake in this land and in the man beside her. When they reached the courthouse, the square was already crowded. Their adversary, Charles Redford, stood on the steps with his lawyer, a man in a pinstriped coat and a smirk too polished to be sincere. "Morning, McKenna," Redford called to Tom. "You could save us all some time and sign over the deed now." Tom's voice was level, but Clara heard the steel beneath it. "You'll get this land over my grave, Redford, and I aim to be living a long while yet." Inside, the hearing room smelled faintly of damp wood and old paper. The sheriff presided, his spectacles perched low on his nose. He glanced over the documents laid before him as the lawyers spoke in clipped, careful tones. Redford's side argued that the north grazing lands had been improperly surveyed, that Tom's deed was invalid. Their proof came in the form of forged contracts and the testimony of men who had been paid to lie. Tom's lawyer countered with the original deeds, sworn statements from ranchers who'd known the boundaries for decades, and photographs showing the fence lines as they had stood for years. But Clara could see it. The sheriff was swaying. Redford's lawyer was skilled, weaving doubt with every phrase. When the sheriff called for a recess, Tom stepped aside with her. "It's not enough," he said quietly. "They've got half the town in their pocket." Clara's mind raced. "What about the old McKenna journal?" Tom frowned. "The one my father kept?" "Yes, the one with the sketches and the land notes. I saw it in the trunk in your study." His eyes narrowed in sudden understanding. "It shows the fence lines from 20 years ago, before Redford ever bought land out here." Without another word, Tom handed her his keys. "It's in the top drawer. You've got 30 minutes before they call us back." She rode like the wind was chasing her. The snow had thickened, stinging her face, but she didn't slow. In the study, she found the leather-bound journal exactly where Tom had said. Its pages smelled of old ink and dust, the sketches clear despite their age. Unmistakable proof that the disputed pasture had always been part of McKenna land. When she burst back into the courthouse, her cheeks flushed and hair windblown, Tom was already on his feet. She pressed the journal into his hands, breathless. "Let them try to twist this," she said. The sheriff leafed through the journal with deliberate care, his expression shifting from skepticism to reluctant conviction. The sketches were dated, signed by witnesses, and matched perfectly with current landmarks. Redford's lawyer sputtered objections, but they rang hollow. The sheriff banged his gavel once, the sound echoing like a rifle shot. "This land belongs to the McKenna family," he declared. "Case dismissed." Outside, the snow was falling in thick, lazy flakes. Redford mounted his horse without a word, his eyes black with defeat. Tom stood beside Clara, the tension in his shoulders finally easing. "You saved the ranch today," he said. "We saved it," she corrected. For a moment, they simply stood there in the quiet hush of falling snow, the town square fading into the background. The ride home felt different, lighter, as though the land itself breathed easier. The fences were still mended, the herd still fed, but the looming shadow was gone. That evening, they shared supper by lamplight. Tom poured them each a measure of whiskey from a bottle he'd been saving, the amber liquid catching the glow. "To the land," he said, raising his glass. Clara met his gaze, her voice steady. "And to the love we fought for." They drank, the warmth spreading through her chest in more ways than one. Later, in the quiet of the porch, Tom took her hands in his. "When you came here, I didn't know what to expect. I thought maybe you'd be a burden, or a stranger I'd never really know. But you've been my partner in every way that matters." Her heart beat hard in her chest. "I didn't come here for an easy life, Tom. I came because I wanted a place, and a person, worth standing beside." He smiled then, small but real, the kind of smile that reached his eyes. "You've got both now." The snow kept falling, blanketing the ranch in white. Somewhere in the barn, the horses shifted in their stalls, warm and safe. Clara knew there would be more trials ahead. Storms, lean years, maybe even more trouble from the likes of Redford. But tonight, she and Tom stood together on the porch, the cold air on their faces and the steady heat of each other's presence at their side. The walls between them were gone. The fight had been hard, but the love they had found in the midst of it was theirs to keep. And in that stillness, with the snowflakes catching in Tom's hair, Clara understood something she would carry all her days. Sometimes the richest thing a woman could own wasn't gold or land, but the steadfast heart of the man who had once kept her at arm's length, and now held her as though letting go was unthinkable.